Hello, everyone. Just getting ready. It's almost noon here. We've got a few more attendees coming in. We have a lot of people signed up today, so hopefully they're going to join us. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes and we'll get started. All right, we're pretty much at noon here in Victoria. I know there's some people joining us from across the country, so I don't know exactly what time it is where you are, a couple hours later in the day, but thanks for joining us anyways. And for everybody here in BC, thanks for signing on your lunch break. We've got what looks like about 37 people signed in so far. I know there's a few more coming, but it is noon. It's 12:01 now, so I do want to get started and run through a couple things before we get the Department of Canadian Heritage to do their presentation. So first of all, let me just move my slides forward here. Welcome to the BCMA webinar number 7, Funding for Heritage Organizations. Now this webinar series is presented by the BC Museums Association in partnership with the Royal BC Museum and BC Archives, and thank you very much to them. My name is Ben, and I am the Programs and Communications Coordinator for the BC Museums Association, and I'll be your facilitator today. I am the one that can answer any technical questions for you. I know we had a couple of people asking about registration problems, and sorry if you had any problems with that. You can shoot me an email. I am checking them throughout the webinar, or you can use the chat function as well, which we'll get into in a bit. Now, I'm very excited before we begin to mention this map here, which shows all of the provinces from BC all the way to New Brunswick that are joining in today. It's really cool to see these things growing, and welcome to everybody who's joining us from outside BC. We hope that this will be relevant to you and that you'll get something out of it as well. And maybe we'll see you visiting Victoria, Vancouver, or anywhere else in the province sometime soon. Now, before we begin, I just want to go through a couple things about the actual platform. If you've already got this far, you're doing great. And stop yelling, we can't hear you, and we can't see you either. So stop waving in front of your computers as well. What you can do is use the chat function, which is that button right there on the black bar somewhere on your screen. That is the best way to get in touch with us. And you want to make sure that you do the all panelists and attendees option, not just all panelists, because otherwise it doesn't go to everybody. I will read the questions out just in case, but if you do have that, we can hopefully get a little bit of dialogue going on. And so since it's October and we're exactly 2 weeks away from Halloween, if anybody wants to try the chat function, make sure you have it. Tell me what you're dressing up as. We're having some discussion about that in the office. I know that there are some kids going as a green Superman and a baseball player here in the office. I haven't quite gotten mine yet. I sort of felt, Queen of Hearts. Alyssa's going as the Queen of Hearts. I'm thinking maybe I should just go as a museum worker. I'm not too sure, but so far nobody is telling me what they're going as. Oh, there we go. Joy from Inside Out. That's great. Great, Kelly. Somebody's going as a witch. That looks like fun. Anyways, if you want to use that chat function, go ahead. And hopefully most people are getting the all panelists and attendees, but just make sure that you give that a try. Ministry of Silly Walks. I want to see that one from Kate as well. All right, now moving on, as you're getting the chat function going, I would like to welcome in Colleen Craig and Michael Smith from the Department of Canadian Heritage. And I put down program officers, but I understand they're actually senior program officers, so I'm sorry for that, Colleen and Michael. And I just want to read a little quick bio about them. They're now based in Vancouver and serving heritage organizations in BC, Yukon, and Alberta. But both Colleen and Michael originally come from northern BC. After a few years working in small community museums, Colleen joined Canadian Heritage in 2004, and Michael is now in his second year as the Museum Assistance Program Officer, having moved to Canadian Heritage after 8 years with Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada. Both are passionate about museums and are proud to be working to support the Western region's heritage community. Now, if you have ever joined one of these webinars, I know I often try to throw something fun in at the beginning before I throw it over to our presenters. So Colleen and Michael are going to talk about some of Canadian Heritage's funding opportunities. So I thought I should find an example of one of those big checks that people often get for these funding things. And I found this picture of James and Bob, who are brothers, and we're really hoping that this webinar will get you more on James's side than Bob's side. It would absolutely suck to have your brother get almost $300 million and you only get 7 from the lottery. Too bad for Bob, but he still looks happy. And I know that a lot of people also probably think funding, big checks, it's a little bit of a difficult field. I know there's some people that are quite passionate about the funding they get or maybe the funding they don't get. So we don't want you to be like this guy here. And we're trying to make it easy for you so that you can be just like this guy and deposit that big check sometime soon. So with that, I would like to throw it over to Michael and Colleen, and they will share their screen in a second here as they get going. So just give them a second. Go ahead, guys.
All right. Thank you, Ben. I'll just get the screen going here. And there we go. All right. So I hope everybody can hear us fine. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to just kind of start off with an acknowledgement. And because we have people from around BC and across the country, in lieu of the customary territorial acknowledgement, we'll just take the time to acknowledge the pre-existing presence and lasting contributions of Indigenous peoples and cultures across what is now Canada. Again, my name is Michael, and I'm here with Colleen. And we will have time for questions at the end, so feel free to write them down, put them into the chat. And thanks to Ben and the BCMA for coordinating this presentation. And I hope you can gain some meaning out of this. Colleen? Oh.
You just have a quick question. Can you sit a little closer to the computer, because some people are having a little trouble hearing you?
Okay, how's that?
Sounds a bit better. There you go. Thanks.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, so this is our full mandate. I kind of like our older mandate, which was a lot shorter and snappier, which was that the point of our department is to help build a more creative and cohesive Canada. In terms of budget and staff, Canadian Heritage is actually one of the smallest departments federally, but we have a really broad mandate, as you can see, and one that includes culture, identity, and sport. So to support this mandate, we have one of the largest portfolios with responsibility for 4 agencies and 10 corporations. Those are things like the CBC, CRTC, Telefilm, CCI, CHIN, and all the national museums. We have 3 main areas of responsibility. We do legislation and certification, so movable cultural property is one of those. We do some direct event and service delivery, like we do the major Canada Day celebrations on Parliament Hill. And then we also provide some expertise, like through the Canadian Conservation Institute, for example. And then we have funding programs. So we directly deliver about 40 programs, and we indirectly offer several more through third-party delivery.
Okay, so in terms of our structure of the Canadian Heritage, we do have a national office in Gatineau. And out of that national office, there's about 40 programs. Out of the 40 programs that the department offers, most are run out of headquarters in Gatineau. And from there, we're also divided into 5 regions, which deliver 6 funding programs. And in terms of a regional structure, we are the Western region. We cover BC, Alberta, and Yukon. and you can see that we have offices in Vancouver, Edmonton, Whitehorse, and we deliver 6 funding programs through here, including the Museum Assistance Program, Canadian Cultural Spaces, Building Communities for Arts and Heritage, otherwise known as BCA, Celebrate Canada, the Multiculturalism Program, and Official Languages. Now, in terms of the role of the regional staff, we work with potential applicants to strengthen applications. We do assessments of those applications, and in terms of MAP, clients must contact a program officer to discuss projects and obtain application forms prior to the deadline, preferably. And this also allows us in the regions to have cross-program conversations. So if maybe an application or a project might not fit with MAP, but it fits better into cultural spaces, I can just basically go, in that case, I can just talk to Colleen, who also works in that program. But that allows us to get a fuller picture of funding programs and also organizations and where they fit. Another aspect of the role of regional staff is that we can provide information on regional realities, as we put it. So we can convene and attend roundtables and conferences, such as the BCMA conference, which was a lot of fun. And then we also write backgrounders on organizations for when a minister visits, and we can also feed information up to minister level as well. Now we have the 4 programs that run out of the region that are most relevant to heritage organizations. We have BCA and Celebrate Canada. Those are generally for smaller local festivities or commemorations. And then we have the Cultural Spaces Fund and Museum Assistance Program, which are the most specific to museums and art galleries. And both those programs are for special projects that can be more significant and larger in size for larger projects, capital projects, or other projects such as in MAP. And for Celebrate Canada, that program funds activities that are taking place specifically on National Aboriginal Day, St. John Baptiste Day, Multiculturalism Day, and Canada Day. That program is open for not-for-profit organizations, but also Canadian business corporations where the projects are non-commercial in nature, educational institutions, and municipal governments, and other municipal, provincial, or territorial institutions. But those activities must take place on those days.
BCA is another program that museums and other heritage organizations are eligible for. It has 3 components, which you can see there. Some examples from the museum community that have successfully applied recently to BCA. The local festivals, the Fort Steele near Cranbrook received about $7,000 towards their 2017 Sam Steele Days. And they do kind of various musical and dance performances. They have roving historical characters, visual arts exhibits, storytelling, and some Indigenous drummers. So that's a kind of thing that you can apply for. Under community anniversaries, the Langham Cultural Center in the Kootenay received about $12,000 to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Japanese-Canadian internment. They did workshops, cultural performances, they had presentations by internment survivors. And under legacy, the City of Quesnel, in partnership with the museum, they received $34,000 to restore a water wheel as part of commemorating the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Caribou Wagon Road, part of the gold rush there. So cultural spaces. This is another big one. It's the only federal infrastructure program specific for cultural organizations. So this one does both arts and heritage organizations, but some examples from the heritage community. The Creston Museum received almost $100,000 towards renos and construction. They did some renos of an attic within the main museum building. And they also put in some high density movable shelving to help improve because that's the collection storage space. For new construction, as you can imagine, is relatively rare, but the Salmon Museum received $245,000. They built a new museum building within their existing sort of heritage village site, and it's the Montebello block. And it's a single building. It's got 9 sort of storefronts to represent a historic Salmon street, and it has sort of it had some offices, but it's mostly the archives, the exhibition space as well. And it's part of a larger, major redevelopment of the whole site, but that was a piece that was eligible under us. And so, and it's called actually that one Montebello Block because it was an actual local historic landmark, the Montebello Hotel, which was destroyed by fire. So it was a replica. And so now, this is sort of our main program, as I'm sure everyone is already aware. But the Museums Assistance Program is, again, a relatively small program, but complicated. We've got 7 different funding streams. The main point of this program is to support heritage institutions and workers in the preservation and presentation of heritage collections. So the minimum applicant eligibility is that you are open to the public year-round. Doesn't mean you have to be open full-time, but you do need to provide professional heritage services year-round. You have to have the equivalent of 1 full-time paid professional museum staff person. You have to have policies for all sort of key museum functions, and you have to have some sort of current 3 to 5 year strategic plan. And access to heritage. This one is actually the one you could receive the most money for. But it is pretty hard to do all the work to create a traveling exhibit and coordinate the circulation of it. So back in the day, you used to be able to apply just for the creation of it. Now you have to include circulation within your proposal. And you have to have at least a signed loan agreement with at least 1 other Canadian museum or gallery. This one, though, we would really like to see more under this component. A lot of exhibits that travel throughout the country are from Central or Eastern Canada. And we would like to see more Western Canadian stories told and circulated amongst one another. This one, if anybody is thinking about it, coordinating with your peers to try to work out who could host and how you could circulate a traveling exhibit, we'll be really pleased to talk with anybody if they'd like to talk about how they can make that happen. We do have some examples where folks have successfully received money to create an exhibit that travels. And we especially do like it when it travels within the region. It no longer has to travel outside of your home province or territory, but it does need to go to another community within your province. So for example, last couple years ago now, the Fernie Museum received $30,000 to create a traveling exhibit on, it's called An Immigrant Story, The Rise and Fall of Emilio Picarillo. And it was looking at, he was a kind of infamous local Italian immigrant businessman during Prohibition days. And he was, on one hand, a really well thought of businessman, and the other hand, he was a bootlegger smuggling alcohol across the borders, and was eventually caught and hung. So that one was really great because it was a BC museum, and it traveled to Crow's Nest Pass as part of their initial application. And it actually, there was ECFs under that one after, which we will talk to.
Okay. Another project that came through Access to Heritage is the White Museum in Banff. They created an exhibit on Peter and Catherine Robb White and their relationship to artists, their contemporary artists across Canada and some in the United States. And they organized the first exhibition to take place in the O'Dane Art Museum in Whistler. Now, you must say at this point too that if you are thinking of doing the Access to Heritage component, I would really work with the host institution on the details and the budget for the first installation, and just try to get all the costs involved in that first hosting into your Access to Heritage application. Now, hosting exhibits is eligible under the Exhibition Circulation Fund, as we'll see shortly. But really, you have access to more funding through the Access to Heritage component. So work with your hosting institutions on that application when you're putting it together. Now to the Exhibition Circulation Fund component. This is for the hosting of traveling exhibitions from Canadian museums. Many, like Colleen said, many of the national museums and larger institutions create traveling exhibits. The Royal British Columbia also does create traveling exhibits. The Sherbrooke Science and Nature Museum from Quebec has some really good ones as well. And a lot of these larger institutions create these exhibits that are quite easy to travel and quite easy to set up and take down. So it does make for an easy application, and it does just things flow a little smoother for your organization. But the maximum you can get through the ECF is $15,000 as well. Now I think Colleen is going to speak to the Galt Museum hosting.
So the Galt Museum is just in Lethbridge. They received the max, so $15,000, to host that exhibit I spoke to before that we did receive support under the Access to Heritage. And so they can receive up to $15,000 to a maximum of 70% of eligible costs. And that's towards the loan fee, the shipping, insurance, the time to install and take down after, and then any marketing, promotion of it, as well as any specific kind of community outreach activities you develop for that exhibit.
On to the next component.
So borrowing artifacts is another subcomponent. It's relatively new. It started a few years ago. It's really targeted. So it's only for costs associated with borrowing something from those two museums, Museum of History or the War Museum. But if you go to their websites, they have already compiled a list of sort of predetermined, ready to travel objects from their collections. But you can also contact them directly and work with a curator if there's something you know that your community is from your community. And this is one of the very rare ones where you can apply for up to 100% of the cost. And it's similar to hosting an exhibit, of course. It's the same sort of shipping and insurance costs associated with unpacking it, repacking it, sending it back, that sort of thing. So we haven't had all that many examples of this one, but we have the ones we do have were pretty great. The Nyambulese Cultural Center Society in Cape Mudge received over $30,000 towards. They brought in a couple of house posts and a cross beam from the Museum of History, and they used it to support. They created an exhibit on the man behind the masks, the life and legacy of Chief Billy Asu. And UMISTA also received funding through this component. They received just over $8,000 to bring in a Chilkat robe that was woven by Mary Ebbets, who's a master weaver from the Tlingit Nation, and 2 cedar bark headpieces from, this is both from the Museum of History, again, to support the exhibit that they developed. That one was the Kwakiwak Women and Weaving exhibit. And towards that same exhibit, they actually had received a movable cultural property grant to purchase a different rare Chilkat ceremonial robe, which was also woven by the same artist. And so they were able to expand on an exhibit that they were already creating from their own collection, and have more objects travel from outside of the national museums.
And the next component we'll talk about is the Aboriginal Heritage component. Now this component supports the preservation and presentation of Aboriginal cultural heritage and the professional museological development of Aboriginal heritage organizations and workers. Aboriginal organizations with a mandate to preserve and support Aboriginal heritage are eligible to apply for projects, and Aboriginal governments are also eligible to apply, but must be able to demonstrate that they have provided support to professional heritage activities in their community. Applicants can apply for up to 70% of eligible expenses to a maximum of $200,000 over 2 fiscal years. Most projects are for 1 year and under $50,000 though. Some examples of projects supported under this component include researching and creating an exhibit. So for a cultural center to create an exhibit on their local history or some aspect of it. You can also upgrade a collections management to incorporate cultural protocols. UMISTA, again, was successful for a project to do this with their database and apply some naming protocols and adding more culturally appropriate information to their database. And that also included them doing the research and hosting meetings and discussions with elders to gather that information. One interesting aspect of this is that it can also apply to create a teaching collection or corresponding learning activities that can be used in exhibits. And this and it can also be brought up to schools or community events. Improving collection storage area to better house artifacts when not in display is also an eligible project, as well as purchasing display cases and visible storage units. Non-Aboriginal museum can apply to this component, but only if it has a strong partnership and a signed agreement with an eligible Aboriginal organization. Now, an example of a project that does that is Powell River Museum worked with the Tla'amin First Nation to work on creating exhibits and panels that were going to be displayed around town. And this has to do with reintroducing Tla'amin place names into the local geography. I thought that's an excellent project, but they're working, so the museum is providing museological and exhibit experience and skills that they have, and the Tla'amin First Nation is giving their cultural knowledge and also some access to some of the recording studios and stuff that they have set up. You can also co-create an exhibit display like I just talked about. And also you can co-develop an internship for an Indigenous person looking to develop specific museological skills. So if you're looking to create a relationship with your local Indigenous groups, this might be one way that you can kind of introduce the local community into working in the museum and develop some of those skills. And we'd be definitely happy to talk to you about any of those projects. Now we're talking into the collections management component. Now this is by far the component that has the most uptake. It's the most competitive. We have the most applications received for this one. But it also probably directly has a very direct impact onto how a museum functions. For a couple of examples, we have storage solutions, part of the component, and that helps you improve your shelving and your storage area, and either help you with the function of that or actual shelving. For example, we had Crow's Nest Museum in Southern Alberta came in and they replaced a lot of their old shelving and replaced it with wire shelving, their old wooden shelving with wire shelving to mitigate any pest issues and just make the space a lot more functional for them so that they can not only hold more artifacts, but to do that in a much more create a much safer environment for workers and their objects. Another part to this component is the database, purchase and implementation of collections management databases. Example for that would be the Kamloops Art Gallery received just over $5,000 towards a collections management system upgrade project for purchasing and implementing a newer past perfect version that would allow for an online component. So if you're still working in a DOS-based collections management system, we can help you with that.
Another subcomponent of the collections management component is shared best practices, which is supporting, we're not able to fund one-off professional development or policy development for any single institution, but if you partner and have at least 3 museums come in together, you can create sort of a workshop or series of workshops or a symposium, that kind of thing. And you can kind of strategically use that if you want to do something within your own museum, and then you use yourself as the case study So an example of that is the Museum of Vancouver received over $18,000. They created a symposium on strategic collecting, and they had partnered with the Burnaby Village Museum, Richmond Museum, and the Vancouver Maritime Museum to make that happen, and then opened it up to, of course, colleagues across whoever wanted to sign up for that. Another example is the Kelowna Museums came in for, which has a conservation lab, one of the few outside of the kind of lower mainland area. And they received just about $9,000 towards creating workshops on I think it was 4 different conservation topics. And they had partnered with the West Bank Museum and the SS Sigma's Paddle Wheeler and Heritage Park to make that all happen together.
Now we'll mention the Emergency Assistance Fund, which isn't an actual separate component, but it is a funding stream that we offer. Now, we do need to say that this is very restrictive in what is eligible, considered to be eligible activities for it, and we are really this fund really only covers for moving artifacts out of danger and temporary storage. Repairs and restoration are not eligible. For example, with the recent wildfires that we've had here in BC and previously in Alberta, smoke damage and cleaning is not an eligible expense. Now, I do have it here on the slide that Canadian Conservation Institute offers advice in working through these post-event issues, such as cleaning, restoration, and also can connect organizations with the Canadian Association of Professional Conservators, who would be able to guide you to some skilled workers in your area. So that would be after you have an emergency such as that, or have some concerns, that would be a good connection to make. Now for this component, you also need to contact program officers such as Colleen or I within 21 days of the natural disaster. And then after that, you have up to 6 months to submit a complete application.
One of the few times where we have delivered this component, probably everyone remembers the extreme flooding in Alberta in 2013. So we did do a few emergency assistance projects there. Heritage Park in Fort McMurray, the Museum, the Highwood in High River, and the National Music Centre in Calgary all received funding through this program to move artifacts out of the way of the oncoming flooding into temporary storage. So Fort Mac's Heritage Village had like extensive damage to all 17 historic buildings, but was able to move out a large number of their at-risk collections before the flood hit. The Museum of the Highwood, which lost 80% of their collection, ended up renting a freezer truck to house like the most heavily damaged textile collection until they could begin the conservation work. The National Music Centre moved 143 pianos out of the way of the floods. So this program was able to help in those specific cases. And finally, the last sort of component of MAP is the Canada-France agreement. This one is definitely more popular in central Canada, Quebec especially. But if anybody is developing a relationship with the museum in France, there might be an exchange. Definitely let me know, and we can, or Michael know, and we can work to you on this one. This one's also unusual. It has like a March 31st deadline. That some date sometimes moves around, but again, just if this is ever an idea anyone has, let us know. But it is very specific to working with French museums there. So the basics of applying to MAP. The key thing to remember is that MAP unfortunately does not support regular ongoing work. It's really designed to support special one-off projects to help take that next step or take on an unusually large project like creating a traveling exhibit. And we have to work within the published assessment criteria and the process outlined in the published guidelines. So that is what you're being assessed on. So read through that really carefully and keep them handy as you develop your project, especially when you develop your project timeline. A lot of what we're assessing isn't the content of the project or the background of your museum. It really is about your project management skills and being able to to be able to show you've done your homework, you've thought it all through, this is really your best guess of what the project will be and why you've come to that conclusion. The final report requirements have really been lessened in the past few years, but they really are important. They not only to show the project result, but to demonstrate your organization's ability to be self-reflective and your desire to improve your own processes. The aggregate final report data is used to tell the overall story of what federal funding for museums is accomplishing, and it helps to keep our programs alive. And always, of course, we would like to have a larger budget. So your final reports are used towards that end.
Okay, so now let's talk about what a strong application would look like and some of the aspects of that. In general, what we look for in a project is that it meets the objectives of the program component and engages and involves the community, is well developed, connects to the strategic plan for your organization, and directly meets a need or function of your organization, demonstrates a commitment to the mandate of your organization, and recognizes the strengths and challenges of your organization. A well-developed project will have measurable outputs and outcomes, a balanced budget with accurate expenses and matching revenues, a reasonable timeline with tasks planned and assigned, and a display of good use of available resources. This is about moving your organization forward in a positive direction. I've also got one point on there to focus on your project and not the funding level. Don't try to match the maximum of the funding level. Think about what you actually really need and can contribute as an organization to your project. Completing the project should be the goal, not just getting funding. Now, some things to keep in mind. First of all, work with your program officer. So please contact Colleen and I and speak to us about your project. We can help you shape that in terms of creating a good, strong application. And talk to us early. Coming on October 30th is an asking for application documents. It'll probably be very difficult and rushed application and might not be your best work. But we want to see good projects that lead to strong applications and meaningful funding for the advancements of your institution. Do not apply for large or multiple unmanageable projects if you do not have the time or the staff. As part of that, you can recognize when to bring in outside help or to scale back a project to meet the demands of your organization. Again, don't think about the funding level, think about what is realistic and manageable for your organization. Good planning will have a mitigation strategy, but you can't control everything. If and when issues arrive, look at how the project will be impacted and make a plan to mitigate negative effects. Be honest in your appraisal. If something's not working, recognize that and talk to us. Contact us. If things aren't going as planned, we're okay with that. As long as we can kind of come up with a plan and how to reduce the effects on that. Also, applications can be emailed or mailed in, but all applications are put into a paper file. Hence, no tabs, no staples, no fancy paper would be much appreciated. And if you are going to email it in and scan your documents, please scan them separately. Don't scan them all into one massive PDF because it becomes very hard to manage electronically. That forces us to split it up and causes a lot of time and frustration. And no sense in the budget. I stole that one from Colleen. Round up to the nearest dollar. That is the best way. The budget spreadsheets don't recognize cents, and it may throw some of the calculations out, so that when you get to the end of it, as things kind of build up to the creating your budget, it may throw some of the equations and numbers out of whack. So don't put any cents in the budget. If you have questions or issues because of that, just give us a call, send us an email, and we can work through it.
And that brings us to the end. So thank you. You can see our contact information here. Technically, our job titles are Senior Project Advisor. We tend to use Program Officer because that's what most people have been using for a long time. And the Senior piece, I don't really know. There's no junior, so it doesn't mean so much. And we'll pretty much respond to anything there. We are both based here in Vancouver, but you can phone or email us at any time. And really thank you everyone for spending the time with us today to go over all of this. The one thing you can take away will be to call us and talk to us if you are wanting to develop a project or just have some ideas. Please do read through the guidelines first, though. If you ask us things like, when's the deadline, what's the maximum you can request, that shows you haven't looked through the guidelines. But do give us a call really early stages in your thinking. It saves time on both of our ends. And we really are, the major role of program officers here is to help work with applicants in our region to help you strengthen your application as much as possible so that you will be successful in the long run. So I think we can now open this up to questions if anybody has any. We just have to work out how to go back into the main. Oh, no, Ben's on it.
I got it. Yeah, don't worry about that. Just while people are finding the chat window, let's start by saying that this will be emailed out to people. We have the slides in a PDF form, and I believe Colleen created a handout sort of tips sheet as well. So I'll be emailing that out to you soon. So no need to ask that question. And we had one question emailed in from Ray. So for a MAP grant, we would need one paid staff member. Is that correct?
Correct.
So MAP is funny in that way, so you it's normally that would be considered an in-kind cost, which would be eligible but not reimbursable. MAP is a little different. We actually are able in some cases to reimburse staff time. So it is if it's staff time, so not volunteers unfortunately, but paid staff time is eligible, definitely eligible towards the project, and in some cases reimbursable. Contract staff, like people hired specifically for that project, can be 100% reimbursable, always, of course, with the match from your own organization.
A quick follow-up from Kate would be, how many hours is considered full-time?
I'm not sure if we have that. I would assume it would be similar to the government rate, which would be 37.5. I mean, again, this is a case where you would want to talk about this with either Michael or I. There is certainly flexibility on and gray areas. So in a large urban environment, we would have probably a stricter definition. In a smaller community where it's the only professional heritage organization, we would have a less strict definition for that. So it does depend. Use common sense, but it does also depend on your specific situation.
Right. And one question would be, can you talk a bit more about the Canadian Cultural Spaces Fund?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure. So that one is great because it has no deadline. You apply when you're ready. And that one, it really is focused. So under the collections management component of MAP, you can look at minor capital costs, which we define up to $10,000 per item. But that's only for collection storage stuff like shelving, work tables, lighting. Cultural spaces can consider just any kind of improvements to the professional heritage space. So it could be renovations. We don't do anything that's considered regular building maintenance. So for example, roofs are very rarely funded because it should be built into your facility upkeep. But we do things like, if you want to improve your exhibition galleries and put in new flooring and new walls, or you're expanding your collection storage space. It could be things like specialized equipment, such as like track lighting within your galleries, or a lot of various kinds of visible storage or compact storage in your storage rooms, that kind of stuff. So that one is one where we are not a leverager. You really have to have your some funding already in place, and you can only request up to 50% of eligible funds. So you would come into us after you already have some money in place and a plan already for either the reno or purchasing the equipment.
One of the big differences between cultural spaces and museum systems program is the inclusion of staff time. as an eligible cost in the project. If you have a smaller project, for example, some shelving or something like that in your storage area, that might also be able to be covered under cultural spaces, but the map would also cover some staff time to help for removal of the objects, and then the replacement, the rehousing of the objects after that as well. Whereas cultural spaces does not cover staff time for those activities. So it really depends on the size of your project and where it fits into your organization. But that's where a conversation with us will help out.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing, just from having talked with Colleen in the past too, that really having that communication between the museum and you as the advisor or the program officer, that's really the key step. That, you know, we can ask all the questions we can in this webinar, but still there's probably other intricacies that are, you know, dependent on each museum situation. So if you do have very specific ones, or if you are involved in the grant process, make sure you get in touch with Colleen and Michael for that. And we have one from Qualicum Beach Museum. So can they verify that other grants and in-kind funding can be put toward matching funds?
Yes. So again, it depends on the circumstances. And you want to check with each, particularly your other funders, to make sure they don't have restrictions. So for example, under MAP or cultural spaces, we don't care if it's 100% from federal sources. But some other departments do. They might cap it at, you can only have 50% of the project can be government revenues. So it does depend on your other funders as well, but certainly from Canadian Heritage programs, you can be 100% government funded. You would want to be careful, again, to make sure it's all eligible, of course, but yeah.
And from Michael at Wentworth Villa here in Victoria, can full-time staff be subcontract in nature, or must it be like an actual employee relationship?
It doesn't matter.
Cool, quick and easy. And we have a question from the Space Center as well. In terms of what's qualified as a museum, you know, they're a space center, a little bit more science focused maybe. They do have a collection, but not by strict definition always known as museum. So would they qualify for these type of grants?
Yeah,
yes.
We use the ICOM definition of museum. It's the broadest sense. That brings up something maybe we should have gone over in the beginning, that both the applicant and the project have to be eligible. So certainly, yeah, space centers. I think we funded a project at Van Dusen Gardens back in the day for Heritage Seed collection project. We funded the Vancouver Aquarium for a traveling exhibit. That was quite a while ago. And a digital asset management upgrade to the collection system. But it has to be about a collection and improving, either creating a traveling exhibit or improving a collection. So it does need to be museological in focus, which wouldn't be always what sometimes, you know, different kinds of organizations do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just cut in there too with the BCMA follows more or less the same definition. So we have members across BC that are including museums, art galleries, archives, historic sites, Aboriginal cultural centers, science centers, botanical gardens, and related organizations. So basically, if you make the case to us, we'd love to have you check our website for membership. Just a slight plug right there. Now, one question from Rob. Yeah, thanks a lot. That's what these are all about. They're about serving the membership and helping us make sure we reach everybody. So it's great. From Rob in Ladysmith, if they wish to convert parts of a basement of their museum into something like a tea room to attract more visitors, would that be eligible for any of these grants, or is there one in particular you'd recommend?
Sorry, renovate a basement into a tea room? Was that what you had said?
Sorry, yeah, something like a tea room or like a restaurant, something along those lines.
Right. Unfortunately, no. So gift shops, restaurants, non-key museum areas are not eligible, unfortunately. So if you are renovating the basement to become a multi-purpose space that could be used, you know, to do your programming in, or an exhibition space or a storage space, those are the kinds of things we can look at.
Okay, and a question from Ray again. Are volunteer hours required for any of these grants? And in particular about the recording of volunteer hours. So Ray mentions that they have quite a few volunteers that don't often record their hours. Is that something that's sort of key to some of these grants?
So volunteer time is not eligible under MAP or cultural spaces. It is eligible under Celebrate Canada and BCA, the Building Communities, Arts and Heritage. And in fact, in BCA, you know, in the name, Building Communities through Arts and Heritage, It is community focused, and in fact, you have to have volunteer time for those programs, but it is not eligible under MAP or cultural spaces.
I think the key word there is professional.
Right, okay. We probably have about 3 to 5 more minutes of questions. If anybody else has any, feel free to jump in now. And while we're waiting for those, Colleen and Michael, do you have any, like, 1 or 2 sort of key tips that you think everybody should take away from this?
Plan ahead. Do a 5-year plan for your organization, and plan ahead what your projects are going to be and how they will all fit in together, so that you can, instead of having one large project, maybe you can do several small projects, and that might be a little more workable for your organization. On a more personal level, if anybody is writing down my email address, please don't forget the 4. There's more than one Michael Smith in the federal government, apparently.
One question from Rob that just came in: are security upgrades eligible for grants or any grants?
They can be eligible under cultural spaces if you're doing a security, like a physical security system to your building, as well as fire suppression, security upgrades in terms of your like digital stuff. That would be harder. It would have to be like, maybe specific to in your database. I don't know. That one would be a bit. You'd have to be able to argue that one very clearly as an upgrade to your current system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Rob says that it would be for closed circuit TV.
Yes, that could be. To be blunt, you would probably want to put in a few more sort of museological stuff within it to make it a stronger application. Unless you could really argue for that you've had maybe some thefts within your collection storage room or something, and you wanted to monitor that more carefully, or maybe you're housed within a multi-purpose like facility. There's an art gallery or a theater where it's open at night or different times. You'd have to kind of explain that one a little bit more. But yeah, that would be a cultural spaces potential project, and you would want to give me a ring there. You would probably want to bundle in a few other little things in there to make it just a little bit more museum-y.
Okay, cool. And for some of these projects that you might be thinking of outside of the sort of standard exhibits or a collections type work, we do have a page on our website. If you go to museumsassn.bc.ca and click the blue tab, which is our grants, awards, and bursaries, there are some grant funding opportunities listed outside of Canadian Heritage, as well as most of the Canadian Heritage ones talked about today. So you can also get more information on some other grants that we might not have covered today as well. So what about the physical move of a museum building as well as the collection?
Yes. So in that case, we would want to talk to you about how to kind of parse out what would be better fit under cultural spaces and what would be a better fit under MAP. MAP, for example, and this is, again, you would want to plot this out ideally over several years, because you could come in for a collections move readiness plan. For example, probably most people know the North Vancouver Museum is moving into a brand new space, and so they did come in to plan out how to best pack up and temporarily store and then move their collection. And then, of course, they have successfully come into cultural spaces for construction, and it could be renovation of a new space for the museum.
And so renovation and upgrades to heritage buildings in particular as well would be part of that.
It can be. We don't focus on that. And if it is a National Historic Site, for example, or if it's a restoration that is not eligible, we are about improving a space for modern professional museum use. So we wouldn't do like the facade of a building, but we would do inside to make it, meet modern Canadian standards for a museum.
Okay, so we just have one more question here from Laura. For community anniversaries under the BCA program, how do you demonstrate or prove for something like a 100th anniversary? Does it require historic documentation, or how do you make sure it's for that?
Yes, it does. So I don't work in Celebrate or BCA, but people can definitely still send me an email, and I'll connect you to a program officer in those programs. Mm-hmm. You do need to have proof of that. And it really has to be 100 years, 125, 150, etc. And that one, it's you do need to be able to argue for its significance. and it has to have some official documentation to back that up.
Okay, perfect. Now we are just about 5 minutes to 1 here, and I see there's a few people that have jumped off already. So I'm just going to move this forward on to our final slide. Thank you very much to everybody who sent in questions, and of course to Colleen and Michael for doing this presentation. Oh, Allison, you know what? Just because you snuck it in at the last second, I'll ask this question too. So is there any special celebration funding coming in the future? For example, I believe Allison's at the BC Sports Hall of Fame, so they received a significant grant to celebrate the 2015 Pan Am Games outside of the host province. Do those unique opportunities get circulated?
They do, and when we're aware of them, we certainly circulate them through like the BCMA listserv, that sort of thing. There isn't anything that jumps to mind for future, but if there is, we certainly try to get it out there through all the kind of recognized channels.
Perfect. Okay, that's the last question. Thanks, Allison, for getting that one in. If you are a BCMA member as well, you get Hoot, and Hoot is our members-only bi-weekly newsletter, and we actually just sent one out at about 11:45 this morning. So if you go to the bottom of that, there are a few grant opportunities that we list there, and we try to list them pretty regularly. So we'll include them in those type of publications as well. So as I said, that's all the time. Thank you very much to Colleen and Michael for your presentation, and to everyone for joining us. As I also said, we will be sending out a follow-up email that has both the slides, Michael and Colleen's contact information, and a handout as well. And we'll try to get some links to the program guidelines in there as well. And we also include a follow-up survey. So the follow-up survey really helps us to know what you want to see in upcoming webinars. It helps us know what we're doing right, maybe if you had any problems, what we can fix. And so I hope that you can fill that out. That'll be open from the minute it goes into your inbox all the way through till Friday at the end of day. So please fill that out if you get a chance. I'm really happy to see more than half the people of our webinars filling that out each time. So thank you very much for that. If you do have any questions, you can send me an email. My email was listed at the beginning, as well as you'll be getting an email from me. And I appreciate everybody taking the time to sign in a bit early as well, especially for this one, since we had about 55 people join us. It just helps to get everybody in there as early as possible, and makes it a little bit easier for our presenters to get everything in. Now, we have just launched our webinar archive as well, so in that follow-up email, if you missed something or if you had to go away from your computer, you can always go back and watch the recording. That'll be up by the end of day today, and the information's in your email. And our next webinar, as you see on the screen right now, is on November 21st. It's going to be called Digital Design on a Dime, and it's going to be by Ryan Meach, who's a Vancouver-based digital exhibit producer. Really interesting projects that he works on, and he's going to run through how you can do it on a really low budget, maybe even a little bit bigger budget if you're getting that money from the Canadian Heritage. So feel free to register. The link's there, and I'll be including that in the email too. And I think that this is one that's pretty relevant to people all across Canada. So anybody from other provinces, feel free to share that with your colleagues, with your friends. We'd love to see these webinars keep going out to everybody across Canada. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Michael and Colleen, one more time. And we hope to see you all next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.